Hey you, do you want some code?
Welcome back. We've done a brief run through of the JavaScript runtime and asynchronous JavaScript. Now, this is something that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper later on in the course. But I hope by now you should have a good understanding of the difference between a JavaScript engine and a JavaScript runtime. The way that I like to think about it is like this. You see, a JavaScript file is kind of like musical notes. It's a way for us to write music, write programs. The JavaScript engine is kind of like the musician or a composer. The person is the one who can read this music, understand it, and make sense of it. And then the runtime is kind of like the whole package where we have the musician, but we also give that musician besides the musical notes all these tools to play our beautiful music. So let me ask you this. If we are able to have different JavaScript runtimes because, well, JavaScript can run outside of our browser, what do you think Node.js is? Well, it is Node.js. Is Node.js a programming language? Is it a JavaScript engine? Is it a runtime? Well, this kind of gives it away. It's JavaScript runtime. It's not a language. It's a runtime. You see, up until 2009, you run JavaScript code inside the browser. That's why people didn't really respect JavaScript. They thought it was a silly toy language. Well, Rindal in 2009 decided it would be great to run it outside the browser because up until now we only had that runtime, that web API and the callback queue and an event loop all browser based. So he created Node.js, which is actually a C++ program. You can think of it as a Node.xy. It's an executable, right? A C++ program that provides this runtime for us. And if we look at this Node.js runtime, you see that it looks quite similar to our browser-based runtime, doesn't it? When it comes to node changes, there is a few differences, but it works the same way as our diagram. We have our V8 engine, and then we have our event loop, and what they call our callback queue. And they use something called libui, which again is written in C++ for us to do this asynchronous operations with the V8 engine. Now, when it comes to Node.js, it does a little bit more than our web browser runtime. You see, in the case of the browser, we are limited to what we can do in the background, right? The browser isn't going to allow us to do much on the person's computer. You can really access, for example, the file system of the user. I mean, that would be a huge security flaw. It just runs on the browser, on the tab that we are currently on it, what we call a sandbox environment. But in Node, we can pretty much do most of the things in the background. We access file systems. We can do all sorts of things. You see, Node.js uses the Google V8 engine to understand JavaScript, but it uses the libui library, which works together to create this event loop to extend what we can do in the background. Now, here's the fun thing. If I install Node.js on my computer and just run Node, if I tap in window here, well, I get an error. There is no window like we had in the browser. Instead, Node has something called global. And there is a global API. Do you see that? Just like we had with Windows and Node, we have this global API that we can use, which also happens to have set timeout and set interval. That's nice, but it also has some extra things that we couldn't do in a browser. And that is why Node is set to be a server-side platform based on asynchronous I/O. There is no blocking. It means there is uses JavaScript, but outside of the browser. It creates this entire environment, this runtime that runs outside of the browser. And it allows us to have the same model of a single-threaded model. But any asynchronous tasks can be non-blocking. That is, that they can be passed on what we call worker threads in the background to do the work for us, and then get sent back through the callback queue and event loop onto the stack. We were able in 2009 we have a different model to perhaps create services. You see, back in the day we would create a thread for each request. Something like PHP would work like this. And in what we call the thread pool, there is however much the server can work is maxed out. Well, the request would just have to wait for the other ones to be available again. Node.js changed this mentally and said, hey, we only have this one single thread. But as soon as you give me a thread, I'm just going to pass it off to my asynchronous runtime to make care of it. And this simplified things a lot. Now there is a pros and cons to each method. But I hope now you see the power of the runtime. Now it adds on this extra feature to JavaScript so that we can really finally have the capabilities we had in the browser, but also the capabilities outside of the browser. I'll see you in the next video.